Freilich and Chanukah, Good and Chodesh. We'll take a look at an Indian today on Chanukah. We read some of this Gemara. We read this Gemara in the Chanukah Gemara Shir, and we mentioned it several days ago when we were talking about Chanukah. The Gemara in Chaf Gimel in Shabbos, Paragraph Mem Adlikin, where the Sugi of Chanukah is, the Gemara says that when you light Chanukah candles, as we all know, on the first night you make 3 brachas, on the second night and through the 8th night you make 2 brachas. The first bracha is Asher Kishana Mitzvaysa V'Tzivonu Lahatlik Ner Shel Chanukah, and the Gemara asks, Heichan Tzivonu, where did God command me to light the Chanukah candles? Heichan Tzivonu. You can say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Kishana Mitzvaysa V'Tzivonu Al Achilas Matzah, Al Netilas Lulav. You can find a pasuk in the Torah that tells you to do these things. So you can say, Asher Kiddushana Mitzvah, God sanctified me with the mitzvah, Vitzivanu, He commanded me to do it. So we make a bracha, and as we make the bracha, there is a Vitzivanu. God commanded me to do the following, and I can point to a pasuk. Where do you point to when you say V'tzivanu? It's a bracha. We make this bracha for 8 nights. Ve'heichan tzivanu. Where did God tell me that I need to light Chanukah candles? There's no pasuk in the Torah. Now, it's true that there are other mitzvahs that are not in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah that we make a bracha on. Most prominent, for example, is the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. We say Asher Kishon Mitzvaysa V'tzivanu Al Mikra Megillah, and there's no pasuk in the Torah for that either. However, Rashi points out for us in Masechta Megillah that Chanukah, Rashi is making a historical point. At the time of the Nes of Purim, which is before the second Beis Hamikdash is built, it's at the end of the Babylonian exile, and before the second Beis Hamikdash is built, there is the miracle of Purim. At that time, the last Nevi'im are still alive. Zechariah, Chagi, Zechariah, Malachi are still alive, Malachi being the last Navi. And therefore, because there were Nevi'im there when they established the Purim, and they established Mikra Megillah, so it's on a different level than Chanukah, which is in the middle of the second Beis Hamikdash, about 200 years later, and there are no Nevi'im. So putting the Rambam Shita aside for right now, the Rambam holds that Mikra Megillah on Purim and lighting Chanukah candles on Chanukah are both rabbinic mitzvahs. And there's a lot of debate about the Rambam. A great amount of Rishonim that look at Chanukah and Purim consider Purim something called Divrei Kabbalah. Divrei Kabbalah means it comes from Nevi'im, and therefore it's on a different level. And this has halachic ramifications in Hilchas Megillah if you consider Divrei Kabbalah almost on the level of Divrei Torah. But Chanukah for sure is not Divrei Kabbalah. It's not from any Navi. There were no Naviim alive in the middle of the second Beis Hamikdash. Malachi, the last Navi, died about 40 or so years into the second Beis Hamikdash. So the Chanukah miracle is about 160 years after the last Navi died. So there are no Naviim. Who established the mitzvah to light Neiros Chanukah? The Tanoim. There were Tanoim alive during the second Beis Hamikdash. We mentioned yesterday, we're dealing with Yossi ben Yoezeh Ish Treda, Yossi ben Yochanan Ish Yerushalayim. They are the Talmidim of Antignos. And the Greek Syrians dominate the Beis Hamikdash. We're talking about Tanoim. The Tanoim we read about in the Mishnah. They are the early Tanoim. We're not talking about Hillel. Hillel lived about 100 years after the Chanukah miracle. He became the Nasi 100 years after the Chanukah miracle. We're talking about Hillel, some 2 or 3 generations before Hillel, and they're Tanoim. And they said, we want everybody to light Chanukah candles and to make 3 brachas. And these Tanoim said, we're making the bracha Asher Kiddushanu B'Metzoisa V'Tzivonu Lahatik Ner Shel Chanukah. So there's no Nevi'im, there's no Moshe Rabbeinu. Where did Tanoim get the power to tell generation after generation to say the word, God commanded me to light the Ner Chanukah? Where did God command me? So the Gemara asks, Heichan Sivan. So the Gemara first says, Rav Avya Omar, Rav Avya says, Miloi Sosur. Okay. The Torah says it has a basis in the Torah, because the Torah says, thou shalt not veer right or left from that the Chachamim tell you to do. So if the Chachamim tell you to light Chanukah candles, there's biblical support that you need to listen to them. So the word Vitzivonu means you commanded me to listen to the Chachamim, therefore I will light Chanukah candles. It's a very different bracha. Asher Kiddushanu B'Metzoisa V'Tzivonu Al Achilas Matzah is a direct bracha. God, you sanctified me with your mitzvahs, and you directly commanded me to eat matzah. And I can look at the pasuk in Parshas Bo, and it says, Bo'erev toichlu matzahs. Asher Kiddushanu B'Metzoisa V'Tzivonu Al Natilas Lulav. God, you sanctified me with your mitzvahs, and you directly commanded me to take the lulav and the arba minim. And I know the pasuk. The pasuk is in the Torah. It says, "Ulakachtem lachem bayoyim harishon kri eitz hoder kapois tamorim anaf eitz oveis v'arvei nachem." When we come to Chanukah, we have sort of an indirect bracha, according to Rav Avia. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav. You sanctified me with your mitzvahs. V'tzivanu, and you commanded me to listen to the chachamim of each door, and therefore, because I need to listen to the chachamim of each door, and they told me to light candles, I'm going to light candles lahatik ner shel Chanukah. So that v'tzivanu has a new meaning to it. It's not you commanded me to light the Chanukah candles. You commanded me to listen to the Chachamim of each door, and they told me to light Chanukah candles, and I will listen to the Chachamim because you, God, told me to listen to the Chachamim, so I'm lighting Chanukah candles. That's the Vitzivanu according to Rav Av. And we'll leave that for today. Rav Nechemya Omar, Rav Nechemya is also looking for a source for this Vitzivanu, and he says the pasuk is Sha'al Avicha v'Yagetcha Zekeinecha v'Yoymulach. Nechemya says that the Rebbeinu Shalom wrote in the Sefer Torah. He told Moshe to write in the Sefer Torah, Sha'al Avicha v'Yagetcha. Ask your father, and he will tell you. Zekeinecha v'Yoymulach. Ask your elders, and they will direct you. The Torah, it's very similar to Rav Avia. And this pasuk is affirmative, whereas Rav Avia was a negative. Rav Avia quoted a pasuk that says, "Lo sasa, thou shalt not veer from what the Chachamim said." Rav Nechemya has a positive, an affirmative pasuk. You shall ask your father what to do, and you shall take direction from your elders. So again, the pasuk by Hadlokas Ner Chanukah, unlike matzah and moror and mezuzah and natilas lulav, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu. God, you sanctified me with your mitzvahs, v'tzivanu, and you commanded me to get directions from my elders and ask my father what to do. And my elders and my father have told me that I should light Chanukah candles, and therefore I'm going to listen to my elders and to my father because you told me to do that, and now I'm going to light Chanukah candles. So again, it's not a direct vitzivonu, it's going through a level. You commanded me to take direction and instruction from my elders and my fathers who instructed me and told me to light Chanukah candles, and therefore I'm going to listen to you, God, who told me to listen to my father and my elders. I'm going to light Chanukah candles. That's what the Vitzivanu means at Hadlokas Ner Chanukah. Whether it's Rav Avia or Rav Nechemia, the point of the Vitzivanu is previous generations have instructed us to do something, Chachamim, Sakenim, parents, grandparents, and we as Jews, we take these instructions and these guidelines from previous generations, we listen to them. We listen to them because God told us to listen to them, and that's the Vitzivanu. When we listen to that which we are being taught, let's use the pasuk of Rav Nechemia, Shala vicha v'yageitcha zekeinecha v'yoyimru lach. Ask your father and he will tell you. Ask your elders and they will direct you. When we do that, what we're doing is we're involved in chinuch. We are asking the elders, what should I do? We're asking our parents, how can you guide me in this situation? And they tell us and we listen. That's a process of a Rebbe Talmud, of a father, mother, and a child. This is a process of chinuch. And therefore, one of the reasons that's given in Svarim for the name Chanukah is Chanukah comes from the word chinuch. Now, we all know that the word chinuch is built into Chanukah, and we call it Chanukah because of the Chanukah's HaMizbeach. Oz Egmor B'Shir Mizmor Chanukah's HaMizbeach. We say that at the end of the Mois Surah. There's very little discussion on Chanukah about the Mizbeach. Very little discussion. We talk about the menorah, we talk about the oil, very little discussion about the Mizbeach. But we know, our Chevra knows, that when we learned Masechta Midos, there was a room in the Beis HaMikdash where they put the stones, Avnei Mizbeach Sheshiktzum Yevonim. The Yevonim went in and brought non-kosher animals, and they slaughtered them on the Mizbeach. And when the Yevonim retook the Beis HaMikdash, they had to take apart that Mizbeach. They built a new Mizbeach, and they took that Mizbeach, the stones of the old Mizbeach, and they put them in the room in the Beis HaMikdash, and we learned about that room in Masechta Midas. We have very little discussion on Chanukah about the Mizbeach. We have discussion about the menorah and the oil. And even with the menorah and the oil, our discussion seems to always be focused on the oil. There wasn't enough oil. There was only enough oil for one night. The oil lasted 8 nights. Yet the Gemara in Menachos tells us that they, for whatever reason, which we need not discuss, the Gemara in Menachos says that they could not use the menorah, whether the menorah had been stolen or they couldn't use the menorah. They couldn't use the menorah of gold. When the Hashmonaim retook the Beis HaMikdash, they had to make quickly a new menorah. And the Gemara says, different shitas, but the Gemara says they made it out of shvudim shel barzel, like spits, those spits that you would stick an animal onto when you want to roast it. They took 7 spits. Sometimes you see pictures, artists draw pictures, or there are shitas in the Rishonim that hold that that's how the menorah was really built. It wasn't built in those semicircles as we see it. It was built in like sticks coming out. At any rate, they used shvudim shel barzel, the Hashmonaim. They took shvudim, spits, and they took 7 of these metal spits. How did they do that? They were tamei, and okay, that's the discussion in Gemara Menachos. But they had to make a new menorah. We almost have no discussion on Chanukah about the menorah itself. We're always focused on the oil for the menorah. We have almost no discussion about the Mizbeach, even though they had to build a new Mizbeach. We're always focused on the oil. There was only enough oil for one night, and it lasted for 8 nights. The Maral in the Sefer Or Chodesh that he wrote on Chanukah He says that people should light Chanukah with oil. And of course, the preferred oil is olive oil, the Gemara says. It became a shiloh whether a person should use wax candles. And this became a discussion. Some people said that wax candles could be even better than olive oil, which is very hard to understand. But they're all shittas whether candles, olive oil. We basically, our minhag is that we prefer olive oil if possible. The Maharal goes as far as saying that olive oil is what has to be used. I can't say 100% for sure, but the indication is pretty clear from the Maharal that the Maharal holds that using candles, you're not yoytze the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. Because the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is to commemorate the miracle, not to commemorate a fire. Yeah, you can commemorate a fire on a candle. You can commemorate a fire with olive oil and a wick. The commemoration is not fire. The commemoration is oil. The oil that only was able to last one night, lasted 8 nights. And therefore, if you're going to commemorate a miracle of oil, you need to use oil. There's something very special about oil and a wick. The way the fire of oil and wick works is that the wick is drawing its fire through the oil. The oil is seeping up through the wick and it ignites the wick. And if it's being done properly, the fire can last for an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 24 hours. The wick is absorbing the oil, and that's how it gives off its fire. In other words, if we were using the Ramchal's language from the Das Tevunos, we would say that the oil is mashpia. The oil is sending itself up the wick, and the wick is giving off a fire. The oil is being mashpia to the wick, and the wick now lights up the world. One can say the same thing perhaps about a candle. A candle is sending up its wax to the fire. But we understand that when you look at a candle and the fire on top of the wick, and you look at oil with a wick in it, you can mamish see the relationship of the mashpia to the nishpa. When you're looking at oil, you can see that the oil, a candle, you light the candle, it's lit. When you're dealing with oil and you're dealing with your Chanukah, we know sometimes the wick goes out and we have to relight it. Why? Because either the wick is not in properly or the wick is not drawing the oil. All the kinds of problems that in fact the Gemara talks about in Bameh Madlikin. And we learned this in the Chanukah Sugya, the oils and the wicks that Chachamim say you can't use on Shabbos because they flicker. And if they flicker, you may forget and adjust it on Shabbos, which you're not allowed to do. So they say there are certain oils and wicks you can't use on Shabbos. Nevertheless, the oils and wicks that you can't use on Shabbos, you can use on Chanukah. What we have, when we look at the oil and the wick, we're looking at Chanukah. Chanukah is chinuch. Now, we just spoke about the fact that there was a chinuch hamizbeach. They made a new mizbeach. There's a chinuch hamenorah. They made a new menorah. Yet we don't focus on the renewal of a mizbeach. We don't focus on the renewal of a menorah. We focus on the oil. Chanukah is in the oil and the wick. And that's what we celebrate. The word Chanukah, we associate it with chinuch, but many times we associate it with the chinuch hamizbeach. Oz egma b'shir mizmor Chanukas hamizbeach. Sometimes we relate it to the Mishkan. The Medrash tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu finished building the Mishkan on the 25th day of Kislev. And the Rebbeinu Shalom, 25th day of Kislev is Chanukah in the future. Moshe Rabbeinu finished the Mishkan on the 25th day of Kislev. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, leave it, do not put it up. I want you to start putting it up at the end of Adar, and then put it up officially on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the month, Nisan is the month that Yitzchak was born. Yitzchak went up on the Akedah, so to speak, as the first korban, and therefore the Mishkan where Karbonos will be brought should be put up in the month that Yitzchak was born. So the Mishkan was left complete but not constructed for 5 or so days in Kislev, Teves, Shvat, Adar, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Over 3 months, the Mishkan was finished, but not put up and constructed because we waited for the month that Yitzchak was born. The Rebbeinu Shalom said that Chaf Hei Kislev will have another Chanukah. And that's the Chanukah of the Chashmonaim. And that's why the Kriyas HaTorah during Chanukah, we read from the Parsha of the Nesiim, who brought Karbonos LaChanukas HaMishkan. They brought Chanukas HaMizbeach, Chanukas HaMishkan. They inaugurated the Mishkan. And the inauguration of the Mishkan really could have started on the 25th day of Kislev. Kadosh Baruch Hu delayed it. So beginning 25 Kislev, we read about the Chanukas HaMishkan with the Nesiim bringing Karbonos each day. Again, so when we talk about Hanukkah, the word chinuch is built in there, but we generally focus on the word chinuch, the chinuch of the Mishkan, the chinuch HaMizbeach, the chinuch HaMenorah. What I want to talk about is the word chinuch in and of itself. Meaning, Rav Hutner talks about this concept, and I assume, I hope that everybody, that a WhatsApp went out. I believe a WhatsApp went out with a Rambam and a Rav Hutner, a piece of Rav Hutner. But Rav Hutner focuses in the Pachad Yitzchak, in one Pachad Yitzchak, about the idea of Hanukkah is chinuch. The same way a Rebbe is machanech a Talmud and parents are machanech their children. This is one of the most important messages of Hanukkah is chinuch. How to be machanech, what to be machanech, how do you get children interested? How do you get students interested? What is chinuch? And that's the chinuch of Hanukkah. So we already see from the fact that Chazal focused on the oil and the wick. They didn't focus on we built a new menorah. They didn't focus on we built a new mizbeach. They focused on that oil and wick. That oil and wick is like a Rebbe and a Talmud, like a father and a child, a mother and a child. It's where the fire only is given off when the oil is being absorbed into the wick. When there's a mashpia and a nishpa, when a father, a Rebbe, a mother are giving oil into the wick, the child, is there a future to Klal Yisrael that results in lighting up the world? There's a partnership between the last generation and the next generation. If we don't teach properly, they're not brought up properly. If they don't accept the fact that we're their teachers, we have the same identical problem. The whole concept of Messiah Midor Lador is that we are partners. I have something to teach you, but you need to be willing to accept it from me. I have oil to give you, and if you allow it to be absorbed in your wick, my dear son, my dear daughter, you're going to be able to give off the fire for the next generation, the light for the next generation. And so Chazal focused on this miracle of oil, which is a mashpia and a nishpa. The yontif itself is the yontif of Chanukah. So as Lubavitcher Rebbe would always say, and I mentioned him many times, Lubavitcher Rebbe would say, you don't have to read the New York Times to know what current events are. And today you don't want to read the New York Times, because if you read the New York Times, you definitely don't know what the current events are, because they don't tell you what's really going on. They tell you what they want you to think is going on. So yesterday, there was an article, very interesting article, and it was in a magazine called The National Review. And the article is entitled, Why American Children Stop Believing in God. So there have been all kinds of theories about why there's so much secularism, there's so much atheism, there's so much the lack of religion by how many people go to how many goyim go to church, how many of people go on Sunday to church, how many people have even any religious observances. It keeps on going down and down and down. And this article focuses on different writers, sociologists, what exactly is happening in America that children no longer believe in God. And the conclusion by these from these studies and by these sociologists is it's simple. It's called school. It has nothing to do with the home. The home is where the decision is made what school to go to. But public schools are there, and we know this really. The public school system is there to eradicate God from America. They took the Pledge of Allegiance out because it says the word God. They want to take God off the currency because it says in God we trust. But there's a discussion in this article, what exactly is being done in public school? And they talk about the fact that it's not what's being done in public school. It's what's not being done in public school. So that children go to school, hopefully. We know how many kids don't go to school. They're on the basketball courts. But you go to school, and in a good family, the parents are makbid that they go to school, and they tell their kids it's very important to go to school to get an education. What you're going to learn in school is very important. The math, the science, it's important to do well in school. You need to go to school to get an education. And good children accept this idea. And they go through school, and everything that's important in their lives, you want to be a doctor, you have to do well in school. You want to be a lawyer, you have to do well in school. You want to be a physicist, you have to do well in school. And so everything that's going to be important in their future has been tied to their parents, to the education they get in school. You want to do well in life, you want to be successful in life, you want to be intelligent, you want to be educated, do well in school, because that's where they're going to teach you what you need. But there's a rule. The one thing that is not taught in school doesn't mean in school you have to have a teacher that says, there's no God. And there are plenty of teachers that do that. You don't have to dafka have the study of evolution. Man came from monkey and there is no God. You don't have to have that. That's all you have to do is not have anybody talk about God. And since the child is going through a system where he's being told that through this system, if you do well, you'll have a successful life and you're going to be able to be intelligent. So he goes through life, he goes through school, he studies everything that's important for his life, everything that's going to be important for him to be a success. And by the time he finishes school, he never heard anybody talk about God. So whether he believes in God or doesn't believe in God is irrelevant at this point in his life. One thing's for sure, that God wasn't mentioned in school, so then God can't be important to my future success in life. You don't have to dafka teach there is no God. You can just not talk about him in school. And by not talking about him in school, you basically told kids that God's not important to your future success, because school is to make sure you're a success in the future, and God's not a subject in school. So he's not. Therefore, why American children stop believing in God is not because someone told them there is no God. It's because in the most important institution where they're being taught what's important in your life, nobody ever said anything about God. So God can't be important. He couldn't exist, but he's definitely not important to my success. For Klal Yisrael, education is the most important thing for Messiah. When we talk about chinuch, chinuch is the Messiah. And chinuch means that we become partners. We're offering oil to the wick so that between the oil we offer as parents and as teachers and the wick that is there as Talmidim and children, they will be willing to absorb that oil. And a wick can't light up anything, and oil can't light up anything until you put the wick and the oil together in a partnership, and suddenly you can light up the world. And this is the Messiah. And this is Chanukah. Chanukah is the time to be machanech and understand what chinuch is. So when we say, where did God command me to light the Ner Chanukah? Heichen Sivanu. Shalavicha v'yageitcha zekinecha v'yoimulach, says Rav Nehemiah. When you light the Chanukah candles, you're lighting the Chanukah candles, whoever you are. You can be 90 years old at Me'er Esrim Shana. When you say V'tzivanu, you're saying, I'm 90 years old and I'm lighting Chanukah candles because Sha'alavicha v'yageitcha zekinecha v'yoimulach. Because my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, Chazal in the Mishnah, and at the time, they said I should do it. And that's how Yiddishkeit flows, and that's how it continues. Because yes, I'm 90 years old, I may have asked some Shana, but I still say B'tzivanu because a previous generation told me to do it. And the only way I, even at 90, can have anything to offer to the world, to brighten up the world, to light up the world, is the B'tzivanu that I understand of Chanukah, that even I at 90, I have a Shalavicha v'yageitcha zekinecha v'yoimulach, I have a Messiah from previous generations. And when the Kindlech see that the 90-year-old is lighting Chanukah candles, and he can explain this, Kindlech, I want you to understand, and this is the point I want to get to. And this is a point that's never lost in Chanukah between the singing and the donuts and the latkes and alakut zaken. This is so important. When we talk to our children, we talk to our grandchildren, Kindlech, you need to understand that Chanukah, there's no pasuk in the Torah for Chanukah. There's no pasuk in the V'im for Chanukah. There's not even a Navi alive during Chanukah. It's not even like Purim. So who made the Yontif of Purim? The Tanoim that you learn about in the Mishnah. So how can they make a mitzvah? And how can they say V'tzivanu? Tatala, because when I say V'tzivanu, and I'm your Zaidi, when I say V'tzivanu, you know how I can say V'tzivanu? But God didn't command me to do this. So how can I make a bracha say V'tzivanu, Tatala? Because Sha'alavicha v'yageitcha zekinecha v'yoimulach. When I light Chanukah candles, I'm lighting Chanukah candles because I saw my father do it. And he saw his father do it, and he saw his father do it. And Kindlech, this is Chanukah. Chanukah is Yiddishkeit. Yiddishkeit means that I go back to previous generations for guidance and direction. And you, Kindlech, listen, I want to tell you a story about Chanukah. This is what happened. And that's why you need to light Chanukah candles. And you need to say V'tzivanu. Chanukah is the Yontif of Chinuch. This is the Yontif where we can imbue in our children the understanding of with all the nourishkeit, the craziness that's outside there today. And never had flowed into Yiddishkeit. I know more than my father and I know more than my mother because I have a telephone that they don't know how to use. And I know how to use Waze and they don't know how to use Waze. And I know how to send an SMS and I know how to use Facebook. They don't even know what button to push for Facebook. So I'm smarter than them. I'm more technologically advanced than them. I'm going to ask them what to do. If I need to know how to do something, I take my phone out of my pocket and I Google in, how do you light Chanukah candles? And there'll be 100 different sites, rabbis talking about how to light Chanukah candles. Rabbis say, no, you want your children to ask you how to light Chanukah candles, not Rabbi Google. The Messiah is not going to go through Google. And I'm not talking out anti-internet. This is not about anti-internet. This is about renewing the relationship with our children, our grandchildren. We've lost the relationships over so much of this Google. Google is wonderful for the right things. But when children want to know something, how do you do this? How do you do this? Or they see a hashgacha on a package of potato chips and they don't recognize what it is. So they type in, what is the Texas K? And then they get to name it a Texas K rabbi, and then we need to have our children coming to us and say, Tati, Mommy, can I eat something that has a Texas K? So yontif that we can do this, where we can to explain to our children that we're a wick and an oil, and only together can we brighten up and lighten the world, is only if there's a wick and an oil, and the wick is willing to absorb the oil. Otherwise, you're a wick, I'm oil, neither of us gives off light, and what you got is a Google world. Again, I'm not fighting Google. And there's a place to fight Google. But I'm not fighting Google. There are wonderful things that can be done with Google. But you want your children to be able to talk to you and ask you, Tati, what is the Messiah? Chanukah is the yontif, the only place in all of Shas where the Gemara asks Heichen Sivonu. And there are other rabbinic mitzvahs. We talked about Megillah, which may be Nevi'im, al Natilas Yadayim. You wash Natilas Yadayim before you eat bread. It's a rabbinic mitzvah. It's a rabbinic mitzvah to remember the Beis Hamikdash, Srach Tumah. We talked about that. It's a rabbinic mitzvah. The Gemara doesn't ask anywhere Heichen Sivonu al Natilas Yadayim. The only place the Gemara asks Heichen Sivonu is Chanukah, because the Gemara wants to drive home this point. Chanukah is the mitzvah of a miracle of light. A miracle of light requires oil and a wick. Neither of them can do it on their own. And the place where they come together is Shalavicha v'yageitcha zekenecha v'yoymulach. Let's take a look for the last few minutes. Again, it's so important, it's so critical that we use every yontif for a different reason. On Purim, we want to teach our children how God protects us and the goyim can never destroy us. On Pesach, we want to teach the children how God will redeem us from exile. On Shavuos, we want to teach the children how privileged we are to get the Torah. On Sukkot, we want to teach the children that God will always protect us, and it's already Bias Mashiach when we talk about Sukkot. What do we want to teach them on Chanukah? We want to teach them on Chinuch. I was talking to someone yesterday, he was asking me something about Chinuch. So I said to him, Rav Weinberg, Zechron Tzadik Livracha, Rav Ruderman's son-in-law, was Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael after Rav Ruderman was nifty. He wrote a book on Chinuch. It's in Hebrew, it was translated in English. Anybody who wants to really understand what Chinuch is, it's like a must-read. Chinuch. So Rav Weinberg says in his Sefer, the Gemara says in Sukkah, the Gemara gives different ages for Chinuch. Gemara says, as soon as a child can speak, he's able to utter words, the father should teach him, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Moiroshe Kilas Yaakov, and Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Those are the first two psukim. Torah tziva lanu Moshe and Shema Yisrael. So if Weinberg asks, Shema Yisrael is like the Jewish code. Loyaleno, before a person dies, he says Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael is the Jewish code. Listen, O Israel, the God is one, and I accept him as my Savior. That should be the first pasuk you teach a child. You get it into his kishkis. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. God is only one, and he's my God. And then you talk about Torah tziva lanu Moshe. That God gave me a Torah. The Gemara says first you teach Torah tziva lanu Moshe, and then you teach Shema Yisrael. But Weinberg says the first pasuk, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, is the basis of chinuch. What you want every child to understand is that he's special, that the Messiah needs him. We need him. We need this child to perpetuate Judaism at Bias Goyel Tzedek. We need him. You're so special. You're a link in a chain that's been unbroken, and we need you to continue that chain. You're the wick with the oil. Please, together we can give off the light of Torah. So we first teach a child, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe gave us the Torah. We're a privileged people. We're a select people. We're an Am Segula, Tatala, Yankala, Sarala. was so special. Until the child understands. Moshe gave me a Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ay, 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 how special I am. Now, when you got that chinuch in there, you can start talking about Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Then the child will have a Shema Yisrael. Listen to what I'm saying. God is only one. When you want the child to start listening, Shema, before Shema, you have to tell the child why you want to listen. You know why you need to listen to me? Because Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. We're also special here. There's a Torah Moshe, and I'm handing it to you for you to hand to your children, for him to hand to his children or her children. I'd be a Skrel Tzedek. There's a wick and an oil that's going to give off a light here, but we need to work together on this. If the Torah Tziva Lanu, the child understands that and feels that, you can say, Shema Yisrael, listen, I want to tell you something. That's how chinuch works. We're partners in the future of Klal Yisrael, and the chinuch, the side of the chinuch is Torah Tziva Lanu. You are a member of an Am Segula, and we need each other to perpetuate the light of God and the light of Torah in the world. We take a look. There's a Rambam that was WhatsApped. I'm just reading one or two lines of the Rambam. It comes from Hilchas Avodas Yom Kippur. The Rambam is talking about how to do the Avodah on Yom Kippur, which after we learned Masechta Midas, we spent a few days going through the Avodas Yom Kippur. We sort of watched, not visually, but we looked at the picture of the Beis Hamikdash, and we walked with the Kohen Gadol through the Beis Hamikdash as he was doing the Avodah of Yom Kippur. The Rambam says in the Hilchas Avodas Yom Kippur in Perek Aleph Halacha Zayin, be made by Yesheni in the days of the second Beis Hamikdash. The second Beis Hamikdash has a special problem associated to it. Be made by Yesheni tzotz haminus b'Yisrael. Tzotz means sprouted. During the days of the second Beis Hamikdash, minim, apikursim began to sprout in Klal Yisrael. Who in particular? V'yotzu hasadukim mehera yovedu she'ena mamidin b'Torah shebal peh. Arose a group called Sadukim. We learned about them in fact, they were Talmidim of Antignos Ish Socho. Antignos Ish Socho, we already spoke about the fact that he was the one. He has this Greek-Syrian name, and he's a Tana. He lived during the Greek-Syrian domination of Eretz Yisrael and the Beis Hamikdash. And he has two students, Yossi ben Yoezek Ish Treda, Yossi ben Yochni Ish Shlaim, and they have that first machlokas about putting your hands on the animal's head on Yontif, Smicha b'Yontif. So that, we talked about it, that's the time already where the machlokas is beginning to develop. And at this time, Tzedukim are coming out. And who are Tzedukim? There was two students of this Antignos Ish Socho during this Greek-Syrian domination. One was called Tzadok and one was called Baitus. And Antignos Ish Socho, read Pirkei Avos Perek Aleph. Antignos Ish Socho said to his Talmidim, you should serve God not for the sake of reward, serve God without the reward. Don't consider the reward, serve God, so to speak, l'shem shamayim, because it's the right thing to do. Don't think about the reward. And these two students walked out and said, what did the Rebbe just say? The Rebbe just said, serve someone your whole life and don't think about the reward. Who works a whole lifetime and doesn't think about reward? We know what the Rebbe Antignos Ish Socho meant. What he meant was really to let us in on the secret slowly, that when you serve God, there really is no, it's a nice thing to do, but in fact, there is no reward. There's no olam haba, there's no reward. After you die, you're done. That's what he's really getting at. And they became stukim by Tusim. The Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos and Pirkei Avos explains the stages this went through, but eventually these tzedukim, after the name tzaduk, they completely deny Torah shebal peh. That's what the Rambam says. In the days of the second Beis Hamikdash sprouted out apikorsim. And the name of this major group of Apikursim are Tzedukim. And the Rambam adds the words Meheri Yovedu. And I guarantee you, the Rambam had as much love for other Jews as everyone else has love for Jews. He was as big an Oyev Yisrael as anyone else is. And he said, when he talks about the Tzedukim, he says, V'yotzu ha-tzedukim, the Tzedukim spread out Meheri Yovedu. God should bring an end to them. They should be lost. Meheri Yovedu. Is shilas about this lashon of the Rambam, but the Rambam says Meheri Yovedu. We say it in Shmoin Esrei. That's called the Birchas Haminim. It was set up against the Tzdukim. Remember, Shmoin Esrei means 18. If you count your brachas in Shmoin Esrei, there are 19. Shmoin Esrei originally had 18 brachas. The 19th bracha, V'la Malshinim, was called Birchas HaTzedukim. It was a bracha, a 19th bracha added later as a prayer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to rid us of these Tzedukim. We say this, continue to say this in Shemona Esrei. So that's the 19th bracha, although we still call it Shemona Esrei. So the Rambam says, in the days of the second Beis HaMikdash sprouted forth Apikursim. The major branch of these Apikursim were Tzedukim. They did not believe in Torah Shebal Peh. That's where it eventually got to. So how did Tzedukim wear tzitzis? What did they do for tzitzis? So they used to hang tzitzis on the walls of their house because the pasuk says, you should see tzitzis. Oh, see tzitzis. I'm not going to put it on my garment. I can't see it all the time. I'm going to hang it up all over my house. But Moshe Rabbeinu said that's not what you do. That's Torah Shebal Peh. That's the oral transmission. We don't believe in that. We only believe what it says in the pasuk. Okay, so we hang it up all over the house. The Torah says, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote in the Torah that Hashem gave him, and the totafos, the tefillin shel rosh, should be between your eyes. Moshe Rabbeinu taught us that between your eyes doesn't mean literally between your eyes. It means where your hairline is between the eyes. And they said, no. That's oral transmission. We don't believe in that. What we believe is in exactly the words of Torah, and it's Tzedukim where they're tefillin right between their eyes. V'chulu v'chulu. And that we learned when we did Avodas Yom Kippur, one of the things that Tzedukim did was they did the ketores that was brought into the Kodesh Kadosh, and they did it differently than Moshe instructed us. They looked at the literal pasuk and they did it that way.
The light.
And because they didn't believe in Moshe Rabbeinu teaching us what God taught him orally. And this became Tzedukim. The words I want to emphasize now is the Rambam says, they don't believe in the oral transmission. These are Tzedukim, and this was a problem that arose during the second Beis HaMikdash. A group came up and said, no oral transmission, only the written word of Moshe. What is an oral transmission? An oral transmission is it is the father telling the son. It is the mother telling the daughter. It is the Rebbe telling the Talmud. And when the Talmud asks, but Rebbe, where's the pasuk? They say, it's Torah Shebal Peh. You're learning a pasuk in Chumash with your son. And it says, the tatafa should be between your eyes. And your son says, Tati, I see you put on tefillin. It's on your hairline. It's supposed to be between your eyes. That's what it says in the pasuk. You say, Tata, that's what it says in the pasuk. That's Torah Shebiksav. But the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe that this is how you do the mitzvah. And Tatala, if we don't believe that the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe how to do the mitzvah, what does Tatafas mean altogether? Is it a box? Is it black? Is it green? Is it multicolored? Is it round? What parashiyos do you put inside? You don't know nothing, Tatala. You don't know Tatafas at all. So the same way you don't know what Tatafas is unless Moshe told us orally, you don't know where to put it on unless Moshe Rabbeinu taught us orally. And this Tatala is Torah Shebal Peh, in which we believe without Torah Shebal Peh, there is no Torah. I don't know where to put a mezuzah. I don't know how to put on tefillin. I don't know how to keep Shabbos. I don't know anything. And that's Torah Shebaal Peh. So when these Tzedukim sprout up in the second Beis Hamikdash under the Greek-Syrian domination, and they're trying to persuade other Jews not to believe in Torah Shebaal Peh, there's no oral transmission. Forget about that. What it says, it says. What does no oral transmission mean? I don't need my father, and I don't need my mother, and I don't need my Rebbe. That's all I need to do is to go into a local cipher and have him write me a Chamisha Chumshei Torah, or go to the local bookstore and buy the 5 books of Moses, and I read it. Whatever it says, I do. I got Tzeduki. Pasuk says in Vayakel, Lo Savaru Eish B'chol Moshe V'Seichem B'Yom HaShabbos. I read the Pasuk, it says there shall be no fire on Shabbos. And therefore Tzedukim sat in the dark the entire Shabbos. They held, you're not allowed to light candles before Shabbos, so that you can eat at the table on Shabbos, days before electricity. Tzedukim said, the Pasuk says no fire on Shabbos. That means even if you light it before Shabbos, you can't have it in your house on Shabbos, and therefore we're going to eat in the dark. So if you're at Tzduki, if a person's at Tzduki, Chas v'Sholom, I don't need my father, I don't need my mother, I don't need a Rebbe. I need $1 to go into the local bookstore and get a Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and I read it and I do whatever it says. I have no questions to ask anybody. I don't have a Messiah. I don't need my father. I don't need my mother. I don't need my Rebbe.
Okay.
This was the minus. This was the apikursis that was sprouting up in this time of the Greek-Syrian domination. And this is what they were trying to spread. She'ena mamina b'Torah Shebaal Peh. And as we learned days ago, when we learned the Gemara in Gittin, the covenant that we have with God is based on the oral transmission. That's what Tosfos said there. Tosfos quoted the Gemara in Gittin and Daf Samach HaMebeis. Tosfos quoted a medrash that the Rebbeinu Shalom knew that the Goyim would eventually translate the Torah, and therefore he only gave what's called a summary, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and they translated, made it the Old Testament. But they have no idea what they're clueless. They don't know what the Old Testament means, because at that time, the Torah Shebaal Peh was through an oral transmission. They couldn't write it down. So therefore, and I gave the example with Chanoch and Enoch, they have their shtus, and we have the real Torah. Even though we have the Hebrew version, they have the English version, they have no idea what the words mean, the English version. They have no idea what it means when it says, put up a mezuzah. What should be inside the mezuzah? What do you write? It's clueless. So during the second Beis Hamikdash time, during the Greek-Syrian domination time, the Tzedukim are sprouting up and trying to persuade Klal Yisrael that you don't need the Torah Shebaal Peh. Comes the miracle, and you don't need an oral transmission, and you don't need your father, and you don't need your mother, and you don't need your Rebbe. You just need a Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and you know what to do. For us today, 2,000 years later, it means you don't need your father, and you don't need your Rebbe, and you don't need a mother. Look it up in Google. Is it safe to do? Look it up in Google. How do you do it? Look it up in Google. What time does Shabbos start? Look it up in Google. What time is Shkia? Look it up in Google. Are you allowed to do this? Look it up in Google. How do you sell chametz? Look it up in Google. I don't need anybody. I have Google. I don't need a Messiah. Again, this is not an attack on Google. Google has its wonderful place, but we have to get to the point where our children understand that we are the oil and they are the wicks, and only through that is there a true Messiah of Torah. And this is now we understand mamish the zel umazeh, in the very period of time that there are tzedukim on the one hand who are trying to get Jewish people to believe that there's no oral transmission. You don't need a father, you don't need a mother, you need a rebbe. Just read the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. And this is happening during the Greek-Syrian domination. And through the shtus that's being spread, we end up with Jews that assimilate called Messiavnim, because you only have to take one step further. The Tzedukim are telling you to read the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and you don't need Torah Shebaal Peh. And then you get a wise guy that says, you don't need Torah Shebaal Peh. One second. Maybe you're right, you don't need Torah Shebaal Peh. But if I read the written law, I don't know what a mezuzah is. I don't know what a tatafas is. I don't know what anything is. So yeah, you're right. I don't need the oral law. But once I don't need the oral law, the written law doesn't make sense either. I don't need any of this. And people became Messianic. They completely assimilated into Greek Syrian culture. And this is a problem that occurs in the second Beis HaMikdash, that Stukim, the Messianic, comes the miracle of Chanukah. We're not focusing on the menorah that we had to build again. We're not focusing on the Mizbeach we had to build again. Yes. We're focusing on the oil and wick that continue to burn for 8 days, because that's the ultimate partnership. That's the ultimate miracle, the second Beis HaMikdash. In the days where there was tzutz, the Rambam says, where this thing was sprouting in Klal Yisrael and gaining ground through tzedukim and mesyavnim, you don't need a father, you don't need a mother, you don't need a Messiah. Comes the miracle of oil and wick and says, Vitzivanu. And where is the Vitzivanu? You have to ask your father in order to, if you don't ask your father, you don't know how to light Hanukkah candles. Because there's no pasuk in the Torah, there's no pasuk in the Nevi'im. Hanukkah is a purely oral transmission mitzvah. It's the only place in all of Shasta Gemara asks Heif and Sivona, because the miracle of Hanukkah became the antidote to the Mesyavnim, the antidote to the Tzedukim, the antidote to all the people who don't believe and don't accept the binding nature of the Torah Shabbat. So Hanukkah is not just a miracle. Hanukkah relit the whole second Beis HaMikdash. Second Beis HaMikdash was being taken over by, forget about the Greek Syrians. It was being taken over by Jews who were Tzedukim and Jews who were Mesyavnim. And the miracle of Hanukkah said, we again pledge our loyalty to the Torah Moshe, which is Torah Shebeksav and Torah Shebal Peh, and to the Messiah of Sh'al Avicha V'Yagecha Zekenecha V'Yomulach. Read the next page quickly. This comes from a Pachad Yitzchak. The last, at the bottom of the paragraph, Ella. The Purkim Mixera Shera Shel Yavin. What does it mean that we were saved from the decrees of Yavin? We mean when we say that we were saved on Hanukkah from the Greeks, it means we were saved from the Gezerah, we were saved from the oppression of the Greek Gezerah. What was the oppression of the Greek Gezerah? You're not allowed to learn Torah. We learned in Masechta Shabbos, every girl that's engaged has to first have relations with a Greek Syrian general. All the Gezerahs, you can't do bris milah. All those Gezerahs went away. That was done with. But that miracle that also saved us from these Mesyavnim, these Apikursim, these assimilationist Jews, we were never completely saved from those assimilationist Jews. That didn't end. Ki ha-Mesyavnim lo nispatul klal. V'yodem netuya b'chol hadoros v'tayma shel kol dor. Every door has its Mesyavnim. Every door has its assimilationists. Every door has those who are going to attack the Yontif of Chanukah, because the Yontif of Chanukah stands for Torah Sheba'al Peh. I read, I believe, last week or earlier this week, the True Meaning of Chanukah article, written by an atheist. And he's going to tell me what the true meaning of Chanukah is. I told the story about my experience in Danville. Chanukah has always been open to tremendous attacks. It's Christmas time. We're copying the Christians with this. They give gifts. We give gifts. They want to take the true meaning of Hanukkah out of Hanukkah. They want to debase Hanukkah. They want to cancel culture Hanukkah. Why? Because Hanukkah is Jewish survival. It means not just physical survival. It means one door is going to be the oil for the wick of the next door, and the light will continue. You want to assimilate Jews, you need to undermine Hanukkah. And every generation, Rafutna says, has its own set of Mesyavnim. They come by different names. The identities are different. The names are different, but the goal is always the same. Ki ha'mesyavnim lo nispatlu klal, v'yodam netuya b'chol hadoros lefi taima shel kol dor. Ella. So what do we do with these assimilationists? Shehakavone hi ki b'porkan hachashmenoyim misholtoina shel yov nischadshu v'niskalu keichel shel shmira v'hagana. One of the miracles in Chanukah, this chinuch idea, is not only did we defeat the Goy Yavan, but we learned how to fight the assimilationist Jew, who will appear in every generation. We should have the strength and the courage of mind, the courage of heart and the strength of mind, and the dedication and loyalty to take on these assimilationists. That will attack us every generation. So there are two things that happen in Chanukah. On Chanukah, we defeated the Yevonim Goy. We reclaimed the Beis HaMikdash, built a new Mizbeach, built a new Menorah, had a miracle of oil and wick. And then the Rosh Hashanah taught us that it's only through that miracle of oil and that miracle of wick, which is the miracle of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oil absorbed into the wick and together giving off life, one generation connected to the next generation through the idea of an oral transmission, which the Tzdukim didn't believe in. That is the miracle, the understanding when we look at the oil and the wick. That's the understanding we have of Messiah. And that Messiah is what we have to teach our children so they'll be steadfast and committed to the Torah Sheba'al Peh to pass it on to the next generation. So Chanukah is a chinuch. And now Rav Hutner says, V'chol ha'yosav shel purkan yavan hukbu l'doros al yimei moyed Chanukah. And all light that came out from our being saved from Yavan are now established for us. We can use the light of the miracle of Chanukah for all time. Kalaima, Purkan zeh mishibat ha'mesyavnim hayaboy mishum chinuch l'dayros. When God saved us from the Jew assimilationist, it became a chinuch for all generations. We defeated the Yevonim once and for all. We got rid of the Yevonim, out of the Beis HaMikdash, out of Yerushalayim. But what do we do with these assimilationists who pop up every generation? What do we do with these tzedukim who take on different names? And I'm saying now reform and conservative. I'm not attacking any particular Jew. I'm leaving that alone. I'm attacking now the idea, and there are plenty of Chuvas Nigris Moshe Feinstein about the fact that it's halachically prohibited to give any kind of recognition to a form of conservative clergyman. It doesn't make a difference what's going on. Sometimes you have a frum boy marrying a girl that comes from a reform home, and the Kala's parents, the Kala's a Balas Tshuva, and she's wonderful, and the Chasna is a Ben Torah, and it's like Huda Moisa Orev Simcha, and the Kala's parents want the conservative clergyman to get a bracha under the chuppah. Not allowed to do such a thing, because under the chuppah you have a Masada Kedushin. The Masada Kedushin would be the Rosh Yeshiva, the Mir. And now you give a bracha to some conservative clergyman, and you made a public chil Hashem. What did you just tell the whole world? That the Rosh Yeshiva in Mir is a Torah person, and on the same stage we're going to honor a conservative clergyman, and he's also a Torah person. It's just three branches of Judaism. It's also to do anything that gives them the slightest recognition. And this is mamish ala parsha. The fights that are going on today in Eretz Yisrael, publicly and privately, in the government, about the reform and conservative trying to get their foothold here in Eretz Yisrael, b'chulu, b'chulu. This is Chanukah. This is where we need to stand steadfast. Whatever else is going on, we cannot allow reform ideology and conservative ideology to get any foothold whatsoever in the home of the Jewish people given to us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, as written in Torah Moshe. We cannot give them anything here. No recognition, zero. Everyone loves everyone, but we cannot recognize them. We just read the Rambam that Tzdukim Mehera Yovedu. People that don't believe in the Torah Sheba'al Peh, which their ideology doesn't. They're constantly changing things based upon their societal needs. We can't allow them to have a foothold here. So Rafutna says that what happened Chanukah, the miracle of that oil and the miracle of that wick is a miracle of oral transmission, oil into wick, father, mother to child, Rebbe to Talmud. And when we look at that miracle, we understand the importance of chinuch. And that importance of chinuch is a chinuch that continues till today. How do we handle those Mesiavnim? Kloma, Porkan Zem Mishibur HaMesiavnim, Hayabo Mishum Chinuch L'Doivos. Lidroch al Aderech al Hachadosh Shel HaNasyonis V'Hachaschatim, so that we can understand how to conduct ourselves with the new challenges that come about through the assimilationists and the Mesiavnim that pop up in every generation. They once were called Stukim. They once were called Baitusim. Sometimes they were called Karoyim. Then they got the name Reform. They got the name Conservative. They're all the same ideology. The ideology is there's Chamisha Chumshei Torah. There's no binding oral transmission. Torah changes as it's convenient and with the times, and who decides what changes the Torah. A couple of guys that studied out there in Cincinnati, a couple of guys that studied at JTS, they're going to decide what it means today to be Jewish. Nobody decides what it means today to be Jewish. What it means today to be Jewish is the same thing that Moshe Rabbeinu told us in the year 2448 what it means to be Jewish, and that's never going to change. And that's our answer to them, and that's our reaction. There's no compromise. We love everybody. We're not going to compromise on this. If we compromise on this, we compromise all of Judaism, and that's Chanukah. That's the chinuch. Our footnote ends that all this started. All this problem started with the appearance of the Mesiavnim in the second Beis Hamikdash. The source of this problem, as we read in the Rambam in Hilchos Yom Kippurim, the source begins during the second Beis Hamikdash with the Stukim and the Mesiavnim, and Chanukah in the second Beis Hamikdash became a chinuch for us how to deal with these issues as they come up every generation. Chanoich Lanar Al Pidakai. Our footnote ends with the famous pasuk Chanoich Lanar Al Pidakai Gam Ki Yazkin. We have to know how to be machanech our children. Chanukah chinuch is a time to talk to the children, the grandchildren, and explain to them that we need them. They are special. They are part of a process that's been going on since Avraham Avinu, Adbias Goyel Tzedek. There's wick, there's oil, we're partners. Shalavicha v'yageitcha. Sit down with your children. So what? So you're 60 years old, you're 70 years old, you're 80 years old, and your children are 45 and they have grandchildren. Isvas, if you never had this discussion, get some donuts, get some latkes. Make sure of course, we have all the COVID safety measures. And go get on a Zoom and say, listen, we never had this discussion before. I'd like to talk to you about something. And talk to them about chinuch. Talk to them what Chanukah means. It means this is a mitzvah that I passed on to you because I saw it from my father, and you pass it on to your children. Let children hear, even if they're 45, and let grandchildren hear, even if they're 20, and let great-grandchildren hear, let everybody hear from the El Zayda what Chanukah is. Chanukah is chinuch. Chinuch means that I need you. You are the future, and I can pass on to you, but you need to accept to me. You are a wick. I am oil. I'm willing to give to you, and together we can brighten up the world with a beautiful, beautiful light and fire. All Yid need Yeshua Shav Yeshuas. All Yid need Refuah Shav Refuas. All Yid need Nechama Shav Nechamas. All Yid need Barachas Rebbe Shalom Shemashpia Shefa Bracha Vatzlacha to Yidin. Barachas Yeshua's force Nechamas can only come from the Echad Yachad Miyuchad, only from the Rebbeinu Shalom when he wants, how he wants. If he chooses to do it to a shliach, only through a shliach he chooses. When we understand this and live it and get it and absorb it into us, we're doing a Gilei HaYichud, as the Ramchal explains in Das Tunas, and each of us does a Gilei HaYichud. We're donating the Gilei HaYichud to Klal Yisrael till we get that critical mass of so much Gilei HaYichud that can happen today. B'Ratz Hashem, the Rosh Hashem sends Mashiach to finish the Gilei HaYichud, Bias Mashiach Tzedkeinu. We go up to the Beis Hamikdash. We go up bring kabbanas, we bring the matzahs hashekel, v'azegma b'shem mizmor Chanukah samizbeach. Everybody have a wonderful Chanukah, a wonderful Rosh Chodesh Tevis. Tevis can wash in Toiv. Everything should be good, Tevis. Everything's going to be good in Tevis. And everybody, please take care of yourself. Again, never, the numbers going up. Do what you need to do, when you need to do it, how you need to do it. Seichel. It's a mitzvah to think through these things. We've talked about it so many times. The last Ber HaGoyel and Chaysha Mishpat, the mitzvah of taking care of yourself physically. So when you sit in your recliner and you're saying, what's the best time to go out to the supermarket? Is it 10 to 11 or 1 to 2? You're doing a mitzvah. You're doing a mitzvah because you're trying to protect yourself, keep yourself physically healthy, because we're going to dance with Mashiach Tzidkenu and have your main amen. Before Shalema, Moshe Zelik ben Reisel, Shlomo ben Simcha, Yosef Chaim ben Shoshana Menucha, Liba Malka bas Chaya Braina, Moshe David Halevi ben Leah, David ben Margalit, L'chol Chole HaKaroina, Pesach Shachar Yisrael, Refuas HaNefesh, Refuas HaGuf, Hashta Bagalov Isman Karib, V'Neymar, Amen. Everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you, son.